Blog Talk Radio.
From the biggest little city in the world in the clear blue waters of Lake Tahoe, broadcasting from an undisclosed location in the Truckee River Valley on the Christian Patriots Radio Network, this is the Awakening Liberty Show with Sean Carone.
When men began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born unto them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they were married any of them that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men, and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, and men of renown. Folks, that is a chapter in the Bible within the first 3 or 4 pages, depending on what version you're looking at, that I have pondered for many, many years. In fact, I grew up Catholic. I was educated by the Catholics, and I asked 2 questions in my theology classes, one pertaining to dinosaurs, the other pertaining to Genesis 6. Both times I was relieved from class and sent to the dean's office, and I never did get an acceptable answer from whether it be the priest, the dean, or whatnot. But I was scolded for asking these questions in my theology classes. And I'll never forget Sister Mary Peter. She often told me, she said, you're too smart for your own good. But anyway, this very bizarre and mysterious chapter in the Bible, which obviously is Genesis 6, I mean, it's right there at the beginning of the Bible. Pastors, since then, I've talked to people who were biblical basically research the Bible quite a bit and biblical prophecy, and most of them don't even want to take it on. But tonight, I'm going to have Mr. Gary Wayne. He is the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. It's going to be a very interesting series. In fact, we're going to do a part 1 and we're going to do a part 2, because this book, quite frankly, a lot of people have written books in this genre. However, this book, I'm only about, maybe 4 or 5 chapters into it. And I've actually had to slow down reading it because there is so many footnotes. There are so many endnotes. There is so much information in this book, and I highly recommend people to check it out if you are interested in this subject at all. It's probably one of the definitive books that I've ever seen written, and it's going to take me a while. It's not something you can sit down and read quickly. And I think Gary has done a fabulous job talking about Genesis 6 and really exposing what is going on not only with the secret societies that we see today, things like the Tower of Babel and King Nimrod. Just an amazing, absolutely amazing book, and I'm really looking forward to finishing the book. However, it's going to take some time. And we're going to bring Gary up here very soon, and we're going to explore part 1 here on the show, and next week we will have him back on the show for part 2. So really looking forward to this, and really looking forward to getting his insight on that. All across America, all around the world, the number to call in is 646-668-8952. And once again, that number is 646-668-8952. And if you do want to be on the show, if you have a question or a comment, or you would like to talk to myself or Gary, make sure you press 1. That will put you into the studio queue, and we will get to you. I will be opening the phone lines up later in the broadcast. Before we get Gary on the show here, I want to send out a couple of big shout-outs to the other radio hosts on ChristianPatriots.org. And I would encourage everybody to go to ChristianPatriots.org, the website, and bookmark it, because the writers over there are doing some amazing things. There's some great articles. Go there every day and check out what's being said and the news. We are an alternative news site. We're talking about the truth. We're taking on issues that the mainstream media doesn't want to take on. And there are some great programs like Fighting the Tyranny, Christian Patriots Radio, on the website, and you can go and check out all the news articles, and you can also check out all of the new programs that we have. In fact, we've got a new one out, Prepper Celeste. She is a prepper expert, and she's talking about getting prepared for, whatever may come. And I talk about that on my show a lot as well. Mostly because I actually do have a emergency food e-business, and if you want to go check that out, it's at awakeninglibertystore.com. Once again, awakeninglibertystore.com. Check out a full line of legacy premium GMO made in USA emergency food store, and the food is a good thing to have. You want to have some backup food, at least have enough food to get yourself in a position where you can grow your own. And I also carry the non-GMO heirloom seeds, which are super important. So go check those out at awakeninglibertystore.com. Also, you can go to my website, awakeninglibertyshow.com, and check out my full calendar of events coming up on Christian Patriots Network, as well as Truth Frequency Radio, as I do broadcast there every Sunday at 2 p.m. and here on Christian Patriots Network at 6 p.m. every Saturday night. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this. I think I got Gary on the line here. Let's see, Gary, with us this evening.
Well, I'm certainly happy to be here, Sean. I'm thinking we're going to have a very, very good show tonight.
I am too. I'm really happy to have you on the show, Gary, and I'm really happy that you sent me your book. I'm absolutely blown away by it. I actually had to get a dictionary, my Bible out, and a couple of things because I was lost at first, and I said, okay, I got to sit down with some reference before I even delve into so much of this. But congratulations on the book. So well researched, and I'm actually in awe of you, Gary, because the amount of information you seem to be able to retain is not something I can do anymore. You seem to be able to hold on to that very, very well.
Well, thank you for the kind remarks, and for the audience that's out there. There is a lot of footnotes. What I wanted to do was bring credibility to the genre and have it so that if people wanted to check out where I sourced my information, that it was visible and easily there, because there's a lot of speculation that goes on in this genre. And too many times I think it's not backed up. So that was one of the key goals is to show the research and to bring a little bit more credibility to the genre that, if people aren't all that familiar with it, will, say it's a little bit out there. And I think, it is like going down the rabbit hole because it really goes into areas where people haven't been before. It's like being literally, taken to the land of Oz.
You make connections in the book, and in fact, I kind of want to digress a little bit before we really get into Genesis 6, because Genesis 6, again, I have pondered it for many, many years, and it's always been a mysterious, baffling, almost bizarre part of the Bible. But I want to digress a little bit because your book, some connections that most people don't make when it comes to the Nephilim giants, the Son of God. But you actually put this all together in such a manner that really kind of links today's secret societies, including the Freemasons. And I think that as I'm delving into the book, I think it's an interesting place to start because you make the correlation between what happened in the antediluvian age and what's going on now in the world. And there's a term that always interested me. It said, and it's brought up all the time in many movies, but people say all roads lead to Rome. Could you expand on that just a little bit and talk about the secret society connection with Genesis 6?
Yeah, and when I started to write this book, what I wanted to do is sort of write my shortest book, because I'm more into prophecy than I was into this. And this was just something that I kept kind of running across as I was doing my research on prophecy. And then as I decided to write this book to be my first book, I began to find links as I was opening more and more doors. And I think one of the things that for people to really understand that, and I have a chapter named on it, that there's nothing new under the sun. And that is one of the themes that runs right throughout the book. So as I was doing my research, I started to get documents and books and information from the secret societies. And as it turns out, the Freemasons actually have a book called The Legend or the History of Freemasonry by Albert Mackey, and it was written in about the 1850s. And in this book, it has all of the legends that they have kept track of, and their legends go right back to prehistory. And they have many of the same patriarchs that people might recognize as the patriarchs of Freemasonry. The difference being is that they go back to the Cain line as opposed to the Seth line. And so when I started looking at the background information, what was going on in the sixth generation when the Nephilim was created, it just dawned on me that there had to be more going on. And so at the time of Cain and Enoch and then into the sixth generation, there was this organization that began, and it's called Antediluvian Masonry. So essentially the same organization that we know of today as Freemasonry. And it derived from the seven sacred sciences that were revealed in their legends to Adam, and then Adam to Seth and to Cain. And on the Cain side, they took these sacred sciences to a whole different level than what people might imagine. And what they did with that technology and sciences was to create probably a society that wasn't that far off, maybe even a little bit beyond what our society has today for technology. And so with these seven sacred sciences that were taught, they developed secret societies and mystical religions. And what they did there was two things. One is they set up the mystical religions that was originally started by Enoch. And when I talk about Enoch, let's make sure everybody is understanding that this is Enoch, son of Cain, not Enoch, the Holy One who walked with God and then was raptured into heaven. This is Enoch, son of Cain. And he learned the seven sacred sciences from Cain and developed mysticism complete with initiation. And so only the elite, the powerful, the royal, the rich, the nobles would be taught this perverted kind of sciences that they took to all of these great levels in the prehistory. And so out of the mystical religions developed the secret societies, and they're like indistinguishable back then and they are today. So we had 4 or 5 groups that were kind of partnering to bring about the corruption that eventually brought on the flood. And so we have the fallen angels who created the giants that most people are familiar with. We have the descendants of Cain who produced the daughters and developed the religions. And so from there we have the secret societies and we have the mystical religions. And that's the partnership that was in the antediluvian world that caused the first apocalypse, that crossed the flood, have worked throughout to change, manipulate, control our history, are active today, and who will continue to work until they bring about the end time.
That's fascinating stuff, and I've been, my research has led me down some of this road too, and that's why your books intrigued me, because it almost seems to me. Oh, let me just pose this question to you. It seems to me that the elite, and we talk about a lot of this stuff on this show, and we talk about a lot of things that go on. I apologize for that noise. Something just popped up on my computer. We talk a lot about what's going on in the world today with these elite, these wacko Luciferian psychopaths that seem to have hijacked everything. I find it very interesting that my research took me down a road where these people are actually going back to, you mentioned the ancient religions, like the Mystery Babylon. Is that kind of what we're talking about here, is the ancient Mystery Babylon religion?
Yeah, and as you move into the end time, what we're talking about is the ancient Babylon religion rising again in the end time, which rose again after the flood at Babel, but actually is rooted in Enochian mysticism before the flood. It is the same religion.
So,
and go ahead.
I guess my question is: Are these people who seem to be controlling the world today? Are they actually? Are they using the Bible as a script to try to usher in the end times before God's preordained time for the end times?
They would prefer to take any time other than the end time to introduce the Antichrist. They've been trying to present the Antichrist in the antediluvian world, and with even very early into the post-diluvian world with Nimrod. You can look at people like Nebuchadnezzar. You can look at people like Sargon. You can look at people like Alexander, Napoleon, Adolf Hitler. The spirit of the Antichrist has always been there and will always be there, and is trying to raise an Antichrist figure to a throne of power and to fulfill prophecy to actually rule the entire world. And so, yes, they have a determined plan that is prophesized in the Bible. They just have a whole different perspective on it. They're trying to do it for their reasons, not just as a natural progression. They're trying to actually bring this about and bring about the great confrontation in the end time. Wow.
So, yeah, that was the thing that really, like I said, intrigued me about your book, was the fact that you linked this whole thing with modern day secret societies. And so let's go back, and we're going to talk about Genesis 6 now. And first of all, let me get the listeners know who you are. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on who you are and what what prompted you to write this book about giants?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, my main passion is studying prophecy, and I've got 12 or 15 books I'd like to write. But what I thought I would do is I thought I would take the easiest book, which I thought, there's some interesting prophetic connections to the end time with the giants from Genesis 6. And just for the readers, in case they're not aware of it, there is the prophecy that Jesus made about that the end times would be like the times of Noah and of Sodom and Gomorrah, as Luke presents the same prophecy. And if we look to the book of Revelation, we do have the fallen angels coming back and coming up out of the abyss, and we have the involvement of the demons. And so just to name a few. So I wanted to, write a short book just on that connection, but the research just took me down a whole bunch of different paths, and I just kept digging more and digging more and digging more. But my true passion, as I said, is the prophetic side, and that's why, as I found the research, I decided that somebody needed to connect these dots. And I think by the time somebody is done with Chapter 98, they're going to find out that they're going to receive more information than they ever thought was possible, because it's going to come at you through every chapter of the book. It doesn't stop. And I'm going to connect more dots to more organizations, more people, more history, more future events, more things that are going on right now, and connect all of those partners that we talked about earlier, the descendants of Cain, the Nephilim descendants, the mystical religions and the secret societies, and follow them through history and point out who they are today, what they're doing today to bring about the end time, and then to bring about the Antichrist. And I'm also going to link the Antichrist to the bloodlines of the Nephilim in the book.
Fascinating stuff. So in Genesis 6, it obviously talks about the sons of God. And my question in theology class in high school was, who are the sons of God? I mean, who are these people? Are these aliens? Are these fallen angels? Are they the dark angels? Are they the ones that God threw out of heaven? What did your research show, and what is your conclusion as to who the sons of God are?
Well, there's a number of different views on who they are, which I'm sure you're quite aware of, Sean. And so let me just name them, and I can sort of talk about each of the categories if you want me to. But the categories are, the first one is that most people, if they go to church, have been taught that the sons of God were humans. They were the descendants of Seth, and that they weren't fallen angels, and there was nothing special of them. And I can talk about how that theory has come about, if you like, in a couple of minutes. And then the next theory is that they were the sons of God were the fallen angels. And they were the watchers, they were the rulers of the earth that were given portions of the earth when the earth was created. And after the rebellion, they took out their second revenge against the descendants of Adam by bringing on the serpent's seed. And then the other thought is that the Nephilim are the same as the sons of God or the fallen angels, and that there is no difference. And again, I don't buy into that one. I fall into the category of the fallen angels were the sons of God, or the Ben Elohim, and angels, in this case dark angels, and that the fallen angels were different than the Gibberim, and they were different than the Nephilim. And I do not believe that they were human descendants of Seth, and the simple, easiest reason for that, and again, we can get into more detail on this if you like, Sean, is that I don't believe the sons of Seth could produce giants. It just, there would be so much missing in that connection that, to me, it just would not be possible.
Yeah, I've heard that explanation before when talking to pastors, and they seem to brush over it. And they don't really focus on the fact that it doesn't make any sense that sons of men and daughters of men would have intercourse and produce giants or the men of renown. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So sure. I think I'm with you. That just doesn't make any sense.
And if people want to get a quick understanding as to who the sons of God are, they can quickly go to the book of Job. That gives the most clear and concise references to the sons of God, and that would be Job 1:6, Job 2:1, and Job 38 verses 4 through 7, as I recall. And in there, it lists the angels who presented themselves to God in creation, and they shouted for joy at the creation of the universe. And there's an annotation in many of the translations that there'll be a star and a footnote, or a footnote at the bottom of the page, and it'll note that angels are Hebrew for the sons of God. And these are the same sons of God in Deuteronomy 32, where the earth was split up. And in most translations, that'll have the sons of Israel. But again, if you look at the annotation that goes with it, it notes that in the Masoretic text or the Septuagint, it's going to be the sons of God as the other translation, and then other translations of the Bible will use other gods. So again, the sons of Israel in that area could not have been around in the days of old and generations long past when God divided up the boundaries amongst the sons of Israel. Israel did not come in, obviously, till well after the flood. And so I would definitely go with the translation of the sons of Israel as the sons of God, and they were the watchers and the seraphim angels that were given the authority level, and some people will know the watchers as archons or hostile rulers and several other titles that they'll have that actually govern the earth before the flood.
It's interesting. Now, I've been reading this, and a couple of other people have pointed this out to me, and I want to ask you about the word Israel right off the bat, because many people say that Israel is IS, which is Isis, the goddess Isis, Ishtar, Ra, and El. Is there any truth to the fact that when you say the word Israel that you're actually paying homage to these three ancient gods?
Well, those are sort of revisionist, in my opinion, those are revisionist ways of splitting up the word Israel. Certainly El in ancient times was a word for God. But you have to understand, Jacob's name was changed by an angel from God to be Israel. So I understand how they're making that connection, but to me, that's just revisionist history using words from mostly other languages. I don't know your thoughts on that, or on Sean. I've read that many times, but I don't really put much weight into that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I do either. It's just I find it interesting that there's so many people out there talking about it. But as we both know, there's so much deception and so much manipulation that discerning the truth these days is very difficult. So I really wanted to get your opinion on that, because I find it interesting, at least as I'm into etymology. I know so are you. So let's the Nephilim. Okay, these were obviously giants. Now that is a Hebrew translation, correct? The Nephilim. Who were these Nephilim and these men of renown? Are we talking about like the old Greek mythos?
Yeah, we are. And Josephus was one of the first writers to connect the Greek titans with the Nephilim out of Genesis. And for the readers who don't know who Josephus was, he was a writer at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, and he was captured. And he was Jewish, and he was an elder in the temple at the time. And they contracted him to write the complete history of Israel, so that it wouldn't be lost to history, because the country was going through absolute, utter destruction. And so, I'm sorry, I forgot the question there, Sean.
The men of renown, the heroes of old.
Men of renown, yes. I got on a bit of a tangent there and forgot what the actual question was. So if we look at the text, there's you've got Nephilim, which translates from NPL in Hebrew, which is the fallen ones. And so people will confuse then the Nephilim because of that name with the fallen angels, as I said previously. But so we've got sons of God in that writing. We've got the Nephilim, and then we've got the heroes of old and the men of renown. And if you look at the translation for the heroes of old and men of renown, those were the Gibram. And the Gibram were also kings and potentates who were the heroes of old and the men of renown. And heroes would also be one of those terms in men of renown that were used in Greek mythology. So we're talking about the two similar types of species, and in my opinion, were identical. Now, the difference between Nephilim and Gibram is simply this, is that a human like Nimrod or an evil king could be a man of renown and a hero, but still be human. But a Nephilim could be both. So we have the description that there were Nephilim and they were giants, as they were understood by the ancient Jewish people, and most translations that those were giants, and that they became the men of renown. They became the kings of the antediluvian society, and they had partnered with the other forces that we had talked about to not only gain control, but to gain control of the whole world in a similar type of thing that they're planning for the end time. So what I'm talking about is they essentially had established a world government and were trying to enslave the descendants of Adam. And that is exactly what they're going to be trying to do in the end time. Now, if we look at other mythologies and other religions, they talk about giants. Giants are talked about on every continent, in every culture, and is just as common as every flood story around the world. And there are over 500 flood stories, and most of them contain the story about the giants, although they're called by different names like Titans or Anunnaki and many other names around the world. But they were all wiped out by a flood because they had become corrupt. They are telling from a polytheist perspective, from the religions that took hold with the people that came from Enoch, the same story, but from a polytheist perspective. And so, yes, in my opinion, and if you look at how a Titan was created or an Anunnaki was created or most of these other gods around the world, it always came from a union with a god and a human female. Just as the fallen angels went to the descendants of Cain, the daughters of Cain, and created giants from that union. So we have this story being told right around the world. So when people want to talk about the various giants, whether they're in China or they're in India or they're in Australia, it doesn't matter. It's the same story.
Yeah, I mean, we see all these things about giant bones being found, and then you hear about the suppression from the Smithsonian Institute and the scientific community. Basically, I mean, we've seen photographs of them. I've viewed several of them, and I get some of them are obviously fakes. but some of them to me actually appear fairly real. And, I know you've studied not only just the Bible and biblical prophecy, but the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita. I always going to mess that word up. The Bhagavad Gita. I'm just going to start talking about the Gita. And you've looked at all these other ancient epics too. And I mean, it's just amazing to me that every single culture in our history has this, these ancient stories of giants. How, we're talking about obviously maybe a fallen angel coming down and having sex with a human woman and bearing an offspring, and excuse me, these being giants. How tall were these things? How big were these things?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different thoughts on this, and when people take what they think is the measurement of the L out of the Book of Enoch, for example. There's speculation if they extrapolate those numbers that the giants were 300 feet tall. I don't buy that. My personal thought is the original first generation Nephilim that had the spirit, the immortal spirit of the fallen angels, is that they were somewhere between 20 and 40 feet. It's not that I'm trying to knock what the Book of Enoch says. It just sounds like that's a size that just makes no sense to me whatsoever. I won't rule it out, but if you look at when we do have some measurements of some giants, 16 to 20 feet is sort of the largest that there's any documentation on. Biblically, if you look at two giants that we can look at, and they were after the flood, although Og would be one that is likely a survivor from the antediluvian age. And again, for a lot of Bible people, they'll say, well, I thought nobody survived the flood, and I'll cover that off in the book as well. But if they did want to look at a couple references to Og, was during the conquest, and we were looking at two annotations with Joshua and his encounter with Og and Sihon, his brother, who also survived the flood, and that was in Joshua 12 and Deuteronomy 3. And so in most translations, the bed is 13 feet long. Well, that's by measuring a cubit. Well, there was 2 cubits that were used in the ancient times. One was the common cubit, which is where that measurement comes from, and the common cubit is also the measurement that most people use to establish what the height of Goliath was, which is the other giant I was talking about. But the standard cubit was 18 inches, and the royal cubit is about 21 inches. So if you extrapolate the bed that Og was in, it now becomes about a 16 to 16 and a half foot bed, and it makes Goliath about 12 feet, almost 12 feet, just shy of it. So we're talking very, very large people. And the reason why I side on the royal cubit is because everybody needs to sort of get their heads around that when we talk about these ancient societies, the kings were the Nephilim and the descendants of those Nephilim. And so if they were royal, and they were, then they would not have used a common cubit. They would have used a royal cubit. So I would definitely suggest using a royal cubit measurement for any time that we're using antiquarian measurements when it comes to giants. So we're talking massive size to them, but these giants just weren't tall. They were broad. They were almost twice as wide as the average human. And they not only were they wide, they were muscular and they were fleet of foot. So they weren't these sideshow, were nimble beasts. These were beings that were built for war and military, and fleet of foot, fleet of hand, very skillful. They had longer necks. They had faces that were serpentine. They had the face of a snake, to be exactly, if somebody's wondering what I'm getting at. And they looked like that because they looked just like their fathers, the seraphim angels. And so they had this long, slender, narrow face with high cheekbones. They had these slanted eyes. The Nephilim were also known to be very hairy, and their eyes also glowed, and so they would light up a room. And in fact, in many of the cultures, they were known as the Shining Ones, particularly in the Tuatha De Danann mythologies and in the Sumerian and Assyrian and Babylonian mythologies. They were called the Shining Ones, just as El, which is a word that's used throughout the Middle East as a god, was a shining one. They're a little bit different. These were beings of heaven and of earth, so they had flesh, whereas the gods or the fallen angels, as we would know them were more spirit. So they were called opalescent beings. So these were frightening beasts, and they had voices that would just echo and just rock a room. I mean, when we hear of the term out of Greek mythology, it echoed like the voice of Atlas. The voices were frightening. So these were huge creatures, and they were strong, and they looked completely different in the first generations as to what the later descendants would look like. And I would encourage people, if they want to get a kind of idea of what some of these Nephilim looked like as their bloodlines were diluted down through the ages, is go to a King Tut exhibition, or look up King Tut and look for a picture of the Pharaoh Akhenaten. And if you look at that picture of Akhenaten, you're going to see a snake's face. And then it's got human qualities as well, but it is absolutely frightening and startling to look at. And I bring up Akhenaten, and I'll write about him in the book because he was one of the sort of most famous and the last of the Egyptian dynasty of the royal dragon bloodlines that descended back to the Nephilim. And he still had that look circa 1200 to 1250 BC.
Well, we're going to take a quick break here, Gary, and I want to explore this even deeper, and I'm going to kind of give you what my understanding of Genesis 6 was, and then have you definitely take a look at what my opinion is and go from there, because I think some of what I've been led my own self to believe in my own research has been a little misleading, but your book is opening up some new doors for me. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back, and we're going to talk about Gilgamesh. We're going to talk about the flood and all the other cultures that talk about a flood, and just amazing stuff. So stay tuned to the Awakening Liberty Show. We're going to be right back.
Hi, everyone. This is Sean Carone from the Awakening Liberty Show right here on the Christian Patriots Network. So what is the New World Order? The New World Order, a.k.a. the Great Plan, is the transitional phase between sovereign nations and a one-world government run by the Luciferian global elite under Satan and his human representative, the Antichrist. This is precisely what is prophesied in the Bible. This is precisely the end goal of the New World Order. Today, the plan is unfolding right before our very eyes, and they are very close to achieving their objective. Rise of the New World Order, The Culling of Man by Jeff Michael Thomas Hayes is a fantastic book that exposes the most important moving parts of the New World Order agenda and how they interlock to form a pyramidal, compartmentalized conspiracy run by a very small group of Luciferian families and ultimately to the benefit of only a few thousand of these satanic psychopaths. The New World Order agenda is such a vast, interconnected web of deceit that the only way to explain it is to lay out all the historical aspects of it, show how the dots connect, and then by connecting these dots, the bigger picture emerges. Written from a Christian perspective, Rise of the New World Order, The Culling of Man by Jeff Michael Thomas Hayes is an essential read for those who are awake, and a critical read for those who are still caught up in the matrix. Historical, factual, and superbly researched. You can download the book for free at SamaritanSentinel.com. Once again, that's SamaritanSentinel.com. Download it, read it, share it with your friends and family. Time is short. We must start waking people up. Thank you for listening to the Christian Patriots Network, and God bless.
Hi, everyone. This is Sean from the Awakening Liberty Show. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Have you ever thought about investing in food and water storage? Well, if you have, I urge you to check out my one-stop prepper shop. AwakeningLibertyStore.com carries the full line of Legacy Premium, non-GMO, made-in-USA emergency food storage and survival gear. Folks, I've tried them all, and Legacy Premium is the best I've found. Boasting the lowest cost per pound, the lowest cost per calorie, and the largest serving size in the industry, Legacy Premium is simply the best. Not to mention it was voted best tasting in blind taste tests, and I personally concur. Shop AwakeningLibertyStore.com and use coupon code PATRIOT for a special listener discount, or call me personally at 775-276-4046. Once again, AwakeningLibertyStore.com.
A bus at one time, truth and liberty, fighting the new world order and the tyranny. The Awakening Liberty Show with Sean Carone.
And welcome back to the Awakening Liberty Show right here on the Christian Patriots Radio Network. The number to call in is 646-668-8952. Again, that number is 646-668-8952. And I will be opening up the phone lines in the second hour of the program. We are talking with Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And Gary, like I said before the break, I wanted to just give a quick understanding of where I'm at with this whole Genesis 6 thing, and then have you critique it. As far as I can gather, basically what we have happening is obviously man fell in the Garden of Eden, and from that point on, something happened with the sons of God, these fallen angels. They decided to come down and, I don't know, maybe intermingle with the gene pool or interfere with God's plan, and they created a society of giants based on them having intercourse with human women. And these giants usurped control over everything. And in fact, that seems kind of what their whole goal was to just basically usurp control of mankind and enslave them. And from there, we actually had God at this point say, wait, this has gotten way out of control. We had a lot of violence. We had there's people that talk about there was cannibalism, and there was all kinds of wickedness going on and debauchery. And God got fed up and said, okay, I'm going to destroy this. Yet there was a bloodline that was obviously pure. We seem to think that was Noah. And God said, all right, you are going to be what's left of the human race. And so God decided this deluge upon the land and tried to wipe out these giants. But, I mean, did he fail? I mean, is that what happened here? Or was there this intermingling of the DNA and the human bloodlines? Did that happen, obviously, before? We know that happened before, but did it happen afterwards? Was there something else that happened afterwards, or did they actually survive this flood? I mean, was the flood a failure?
Yeah, so if we look at Genesis 6, we have the Nephilim narrative that begins Genesis 6, and there's nothing to separate the Nephilim narrative from the flood narrative. So it's one story. So we need, for people who think that the giants didn't have anything to do with the cause of the flood, they were one of the direct causes of the flood. But in partnership with the other groups that we have talked about previously, with the mystical religions and the secret societies, the descendants of Cain, and being taught by the fallen angels, the seven sacred sciences, and the other illicit knowledge that came along with it. But we also look in Genesis 6, and it says that the Nephilim were both before and after the flood. So we need to look at that. This was obviously not unexpected by God, that the Nephilim weren't going to be finished with. So the question really gets to be did God fail, or was this just a restart to give the whole world a fresh new start with this pure line that we have a record of Noah going back to Seth to start the world anew? So we have to make a clear distinction here that either the Nephilim were recreated after the flood again with a second impassioned violation against the laws of creation by the dark angels, or they somehow survived the flood. Or some people think, as you pointed out, Sean, is that there was some DNA either in the wives of Noah's sons, or some other DNA manipulation, or some way of mixed blood that crossed over the flood. I don't buy into the wives having a Nephilim DNA, because it makes no sense that if God would make sure Noah and his sons had pure human Adamite bloodlines, why they wouldn't make sure that the wives were not the same. That makes no sense to me. So we have the two possible theories then is how did they survive? Either recreated or somehow survived. And if people know the flood story, it says, for the most part, if you read it that way, it says that everything was destroyed. Well, only what it says was destroyed is what was created by God. Now, if you want to look at that interpretation and say, okay, fallen angels through human females created another species that wasn't created by God. And that would be one way of skirting around that sort of legalized version of the flood. Because, pardon me?
No, I said I see. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think every word that's in the Bible is important, and it's there for a reason. But we're not given the details in Genesis as to how that happened, or was there? And we are not given the details that there was another second recreation after the flood. But we can look at Nephilim surviving the flood biblically. We have all of these giants that survived the flood, whether it was the Rephites or the Anakites or the Amalekites or the Hittites, the Avites, the Emites, the Zamzamites, and on and on. There's just all of these giant nations that are around immediately after the flood, but none of them connect back to the table of nations. Only the descendants of Noah connect back to the table of nations. And even some of the later descendants, once they intermingled with the giants, their genealogies are no longer recorded. So you don't see Nimrod's descendants being recorded. And you can say the same thing from Japheth's line with Gog and Magog. And interestingly, in other languages, Gog translates as a giant. Now, that doesn't mean that Gog, son of Japheth, was a giant. It just means that they cohabitated with the survivors of giants. So we have to sort of figure out how this happened, and I spent a lot of time in the book giving ways that happened. And so we can look at other mythologies and see what they say, and then see how in other religions and see what that says, and see how that matches up with what's written in the Bible. And again, for the listeners out there, I'll measure up all of the research that I do against what it says in the Bible. So if it doesn't make sense with what's written in Scripture, then I discard it. But if it does match up, and so much of it does, then we do have other possibilities. But we don't have an explanation in the Bible as to how these giants survived. And so if we look at, let's say, the Greek mythology, for example, and we have Deucalion and Norea surviving the flood. Well, it sounds like an ark story. It is an ark story, except when you get into the details. So if you look at Deucalion, he is the son of Prometheus. Now, there were two Prometheuses. One was a god and one was a titan. And so again, when we look at prehistory, whether it's Titans or the Anunnaki, you can have a heavenly Anunnaki and an earthly Anunnaki, and you can have a heavenly Titan and you can have an earthly Titan. Again, the separation is the type of God. One's a god, one's a demigod. One's a fallen angel, one's a Nephilim. And so the second creation from the God with human females is the lower level of God, which was a demigod like a Nephilim. So even in the Greek mythology, which the Gnostics like to use, we're seeing a recollection of giants surviving, not of humans. So if we look around the different mythologies around the world, we see giants surviving in all of those stories. There's very, very few stories of the human first survival. There are some, but they're mostly stories of the giants surviving. And if we look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, that's another one. And this one is really kind of interesting because it kind of brings both of the concepts together. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have several characters. We have Gilgamesh, we have Enkidu, and we have Utnapishtim, which some people will recognize in other translations from the Middle East as Ziusudra. So these are the three main ones. But it's the Epic of Gilgamesh and the name Gilgamesh that most people are familiar with. And so Gilgamesh was a survivor of the flood, and he survived on the ark with Utnapishtim because he was one of the relatives of Utnapishtim. I'm struggling with my words tonight as well, too, Sean. And he is known as a demigod and as a giant. And what's interesting about Gilgamesh is he is mentioned by name in the book of Enoch as one of the giants that was warned about the flood. Even though they knew there was nothing that they could do, they were preparing for how they were going to take their knowledge, their religion, and, of course, the survival of the giants across the flood through another ark. And so Gilgamesh tells a story to Enkidu. Enkidu is created after the flood and another creation of giants to counterbalance Gilgamesh because he's such a monstrous, ruthless ruler, but they become friends. And so that plan doesn't work for the gods who created Enkidu afterwards. And he was a demigod just like Gilgamesh was. And Ziusudra or Utnapishtim was the king of the Nephilim of the area that they lived in, which was likely still the same area as where the story came from, as Sumeria, at the time of the flood. And he was the archetypical king or Nephilim, military warrior, potentate of that time. He was not this Noah-type figure. And so the three main characters in this whole story are Nephilim, and we're just in the preamble of it. So this, again, is just another retelling from a polytheist perspective about giant survival. And so all around the world, we have people running to the tops of mountains to survive, all sorts of arks. And in some areas of the Gnostic religion, they will actually have the Sethites from Amenhotep Seth, which is not the Seth of the biblical line. It's a special giant that was created in their religion, was actually separated in a cloud and taken off the earth to survive the flood and then came back. Also in the Greek mythology, we had the rebellion of the Titans, and after they lost the battle, the rebellious Titans were imprisoned into Tartarus. And it was a special prison. Some people believe it was in the earth, but wherever it was, they escaped after the flood, and they had repopulated with their kind after the flood. We don't know whether it's somehow they survived the flood or there was another recreation, but we know in all accounts around the world, including the Bible, the Nephilim are back.
And you know what really freaks me out, and this question keeps popping up into my head when we talk about Revelations, and it talks about, at the end of times will be as in the days of Noah. And obviously, I look around today with what's going on with genetically modified foods, what they're doing with human DNA, and obviously they've got some technology, whether they're looking for life extension technology or trying to become gods on this earth and overcome what God said at that point they are mortal. And I see this manipulation of DNA, which obviously to me, Genesis 6 appears to me that there was some intermingling of the gene pool from the fallen angels that started something God decided he didn't want to have. But now we see that happening again today with all the science that we see. That kind of freaks me out. Are we close? Is that what's really occurring today?
Well, I think, when we look at Nephilim being recreated, this is a concept that's never really gone away. And we'll see it come up, especially in the secret societies and the other religions, that they're always trying to create the so-called new man. The same belief system, the same secret societies that created Nazism is the same belief system that is going to try and recreate Nephilim in the end time. And so whether or not it's by gene manipulation or some other form of genetics or crossbreeding, as what happened in the antediluvian times, we're going to see some form of recreation of a new man as the lore goes these days, or the mythos goes these days, whether or not they're giants or not, or whether or not they're created by the copulation of the fallen angels who come up out of the abyss in the end time. We're not sure, but what we are told is it's going to be like the days of Noah. Now, when you talk about the aspect of DNA manipulation, this is not an unusual thing if you look at some of the references that come out of the other cultures again. So if we look at the creation of these Amekisethites that we're talking about as a special creation of another race of giants that the Gnostics believe, they were created in a cloud as well. And that suggests some sort of DNA manipulation. The centaurs were created in a cloud in Greek mythology. So there's this sort of off-world DNA manipulation thing that's got a connection to what's going on with the alien phenomena with hybrids and DNA manipulation in that mythos. So there's certainly a possibility of that. So whether or not we do it through ourselves, whether or not the aliens are going to do it, or whether or not the fallen angels are going to repopulate, we're going to see this come about again in the end time, because it will be like the days of Noah.
You touched on another subject there that's always interested me, and I've done a lot of studying into this. I've watched a lot of videos. I've watched a lot of books. I've come to the conclusion that there is an alien phenomena. There is a UFO phenomena, that people experience this stuff, and it's not that they're wackos or they're tinfoil-wearing hat people, but I've come to the conclusion for myself and my own experiences in life that this whole alien UFO phenomena, that these are actually angels, that they're, and many of them are maybe benevolent angels, and then you've got the demons who are certainly malevolent, and they're messing with humankind. What is your thought on that? I know I'm kind of going off topic here, but I find it very interesting that many people experience these types of alien encounters, and they seem very demonic to me.
Mm-hmm. There's a direct relationship there, and it's there may be several different versions of what people know as the alien phenomena. So let me just sort of backstep a little bit to what I mean by that. So again, if we look at all of these things that are entertainment blasts us on a regular basis, all of this sort of brainwashing that goes on, and let's take whether it's the Narnia tales or it's the Lord of the Rings, they're talking about prehistory, and they're talking about the legacy of the polytheist belief system. And we see all these different versions of peoples in prehistory, like little elves and hobbits and fairies and all sorts of different things that were going on in prehistory. And, you know, at the end of the Lord of the Rings, when it's the time of man, you see all of these species going off on a boat because now it's the time of man, which is, again, another sort of imagery of what happened at the flood, that they weren't going to be at least visible after the flood. That's their belief system. Now I'm going to start to connect this a little bit, and I'm walking through this fairly quickly, but if we go to the Tuatha De Danann mythology, where the fairy allegories intermix and are part of the Tuatha De Danann mythology, and the Tuatha De Danann were giants as well in mythology, and they actually connect back to descending from Atlantis and were part of the Atlantean world government empire, which again the secret societies are wanting to create the new Atlantis. And again, that's because they're trying to do what they've been trying to do right from the beginning. So, but let's talk about the Tuatha De Danann and the fairies.
Let me just ask you a real quick question before you go on, sure. Gary. The whole Atlantean thing, I keep making this correlation between Atlantis and a one world order or a new world order or an old world order. I mean, was that like a one world government?
Yes. There was 10 empires to it. They were in the they were trying, if you go into the legends written down by Plato, they were checked by the Athenians of the antediluvian time. Otherwise, they probably would have taken over the whole world. But they were considered the helm of world government, and they had 10 divisions to that empire, and that's what they're going to set up in the end time. And so when Francis Bacon wrote the New Atlantis, that we know from the modern lingo that all the secret societies and everybody use, that they're going to create the New Age of Atlantis, which is the golden age of Atlantis, they're going to use the same format. So all of this connects, and all the metaphors and the allegories connect, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to understand the history, so that we can understand the language that these people are talking about today, these organizations and religions, because they're doing it right in front of us, and they're telling us what they're going to do. Most people just don't make the connections. But when we talk about the fairies, there are 4 classifications of fairies. And I have 2 allegories in the book, Fairies and Dragons. And here's one aspect of the fairy allegory. So in the 4 classifications of fairies in fairy mythology, the first one are the opalescent beings that came from somewhere else, from other planets or from another dimension. And those are the fallen angels. So they had wings. They are the exact descriptions of fallen angels, and are described as the ones who rebelled with Lucifer in the rebellion. The second classification is the earthborn fairies, and that's the Nephilim. The third class is the daemons, which are demons. It's spelled D-A-E-M-O-N-S. That is the ghostly spirits of the Nephilim whose bodies died out, the first generation who had the immortal spirit. And then there's a classification where I'm going to come to with the aliens as part of the classification, and that's called the elementals. And within the elementals, there are 3 groups. There are the gnomes, the leprechauns, and the little people. And the gnomes have a few other names like goblins and trolls, and they're ugly little spindly ones. But within that group of the gnomes, there's one specific one that's called the Grey Neighbors in Scotland, and they're these gray little elves. And if you look at fairy mythology out of, let's say, England or Celtic, they have these little gray neighbors, as the Scottish people like to talk them, that had flying machines that used to kidnap young people, abduct them, and then return them a fortnight later or 14 days later, and they would have done experiments on them, and they had no memory of this unless they went under hypnosis to get that information back. And so in my book, I'll actually give an example of a fairy abduction from, I think, 150, close to 200 years ago. And if you didn't know that you were reading a fairy abduction, you would think you were reading an abduction by a gray alien. Now, when we look at some of the science fiction that goes on out there, and in terms of how we're being bombarded, there were many different species in Star Wars or Star Trek, and we're going to see a lot of different variations of these types of species as they present this delusion to us in the end time. So again, what happened in prehistory is going to be changed for our so-called technically advanced civilization in a way that we're going to accept it. So I think that there are survivors of these little people that are acting as the aliens, and I also believe that the demons are involved. And I also believe the fallen angels are involved. And fallen angels have a changeling quality to them. So they can take any shape that they want in this realm. So they could easily imitate other beings. But I think there are the classifications of these other beings that possibly some of them also survived from the flood. And I know that sounds way out there for a lot of the audience. But believe me, as the book outlays things, you're going to say, this makes some sense as we get through the book.
Yeah, and it has made sense to me for quite some time. You know, I one of the guys that got me on to researching that was Chuck Missler, and because I was really steeped into the alien mytho and the Sumerian culture and the Anunnaki and Planet X and all this stuff, and obviously all the science fiction that seemed to have brainwashed me into believing that there were, aliens coming from far-off galaxies and far-off solar systems and other planets traveling hundreds of light years. So I kind of bought into that. But when I started really looking at the possibility that these were interdimensional beings, that these were fallen angels, and then even, and I got to step out there on a limb here and say that I'm a Christian not because I was raised that way, or because actually I was raised Catholic and I stepped out of the religion because I was just confused to no end. But I've had all these burning bush experiences in my life where God has been in my life. And, I've had experiences where I have had angels touch me. I've had good and positivity touch me. I've had love. I've felt God in my life. But I've also had experiences, obviously, as a professional musician and being wrapped up in the music industry where the demons were around me. And in many of those experiences, Gary, I got to say, were very much like what you were describing as an alien encounter, or even an abduction encounter, almost a possession encounter. Very strange stuff. And I just find it fascinating. And I'm so glad that you go into it in the book, because I don't think it's that far off at all.
And I think when we look at some of the prophetic ends of the end, prophetic passages in the Bible of the end days, where we talk about war in heaven, and we talk about heavenly beings being captured with the two witnesses, and it prophesies that the Antichrist is trying to raise his throne into the heavens. I think there's a connection there, whether or not it's as we see in Star Wars or Star Trek or all these other different science fiction ones, that there's actually a galactic species that's out there, that's all over the universe. We don't know that, but what I do believe is that is going to be part of the delusion, and that's what they're going to ask us to do, is to choose, as in Star Wars, for example, to rebel against the oppressive government, which they'll label as God and monotheism. You have to fight for your freedom, just as Lucifer and the fallen angels have been in rebellion since they revolted from God, and they're going to have us make a choice to stand and fight to earn our seat at the galactic table, as they'll probably describe it to us. But what we do know for sure is that we're going to have angelic beings, whether they're aliens or angelic beings. They are going to be part of the mix. So you could have angels plus aliens, or they could just be a complete angelic deception.
Yeah, I see it as a deception in my heart of heart, in my gut. That's what I see coming, basically based on all the media that we see and all of the Hollywood and all the science fiction, that some of this great deception is going to be an alien invasion of some sort to try and usher in their one world government under the guise of protection. And I find that very interesting. Gary, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, I want to get into Enoch and Lamech, and the fact that I've always wondered, having read the book of Enoch, and you pointed out in your book, and I'd heard this before, but I never really paid much attention to it, but there were two Enochs, so I really want to talk about that when we come back. So everybody stay tuned. We're going to be right back here on the Awakening Liberty Show with Gary Wayne, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, so hang tight.
Happened on September 11th when 3,000 American citizens were sent into heaven. Why's the fairy tale version got so many questions? The story is bogus. We all know this. I mean, why did they steal the footage when a missile hit the Pentagon? Why were hundreds of eyewitness testimonies contradicting the official story completely ignored? Why did thousands of professional architects, engineers, pilots, firemen, and police officers all question the official events? The The fires in the towers? Well, we know they were oxygen-starved, as people were waving through the windows where the bombing had started. Let me get this straight. These fires couldn't melt people or glass, but they could melt 47 steel frames? World Trade 7 wasn't hit by a plane, but at 5 p.m. suddenly collapsed. The owners said pull it and admitted they knew. That was Larry Silverstein from the Blackstone Group. There was evidence of controlled demolition and molten steel at the base of the towers. Why was Buzzy Krongard selling airline stocks? Why did the Pentagon officials all cancel their flights? Why was Dick Cheney running hijacking drills, and why didn't NORAD try and intercept? Why was Dick Cheney planning for a war in Iraq and had already planned for the Patriot Act? Why did supposed hijackers train at Air Force bases? Why did Flight 93 land in 2 places? Why did agents from Mossad laugh and videotape, and why did FBI agents let them escape? Why did 6 of the 11 members of the 9/11 Commission report all state publicly that there was a cover-up? In the words of Roy Shivers, why was 9/11 such an inside job? Because the facts make it easy to solve. Ask questions. Demand answers. Do your own research. The truth is out there. Educate and inform yourself. Watch Loose Change Conspiracy Final Cut on YouTube. Support Christian Patriots Radio and the 9/11 Truth Movement. Thank you very much. A bus at one time, truth and liberty, fighting the new world order and the tyranny, the Awakening Liberty Show with Sean Carone. And welcome back to the Awakening Liberty Show right here on Christian Patriots Radio. The phone lines will be open this second hour, and the number to call in is 646-668-8952. Again, that number is 646-668-8952. And if you have a question for Gary, make sure you press 1. That will put you into my studio queue and give me an indication that you do want to be on the program. We are talking with Gary Wayne. His book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, I just started reading it, and it's been amazing to me so far. I'm about 4 or 5 chapters in, but Gary, I definitely had to sit down with a dictionary and sit down with my Bible. And I'm reading these very slowly so that I can really take in all of the information because it is so full of information. I would imagine this book is going to probably take me a couple of months to read, but so looking forward to getting through it and connecting all the dots that you seem to be connecting within this. One of the things you talk about in the book, and in reading the book of Enoch myself, I was often confused as to who was talking, and not so much in the first book, but the other 2. And many people think that those were manipulated. Can we talk a little bit about the book of Enoch, where it came from, who initially translated it? Because he was a Freemason, was he not?
Enoch was a Freemason?
No. The guy that translated the book of Enoch after it was found.
Oh, yes, he was a Freemason, yes. So
I find that.
No, I don't find that surprising whatsoever.
So
let's just talk a little bit about Enoch, and let me just sort of backpedal my way into this. In fact, one of the people that discovered the first Gnostic scriptures was descendants of Robert de Bruce, and also did the translations on that. And that's no coincidence either. People are going to find in the book that everything is connected. We were talking before the break about the aliens, and if you look at all of the science fiction that's out there, it's absolutely embedded with mystical religion, whether it's the Force, universal life force, or if we talk about the Matrix and the religion that's in there, that's not a coincidence. And if people don't know sort of where the modern secret societies came from, it came from the descendants of the Essenes at the time of Jesus, who moved to Europe after the destruction of Jerusalem and Judah. And the Essenes were one of 3 distinct sects of the Judaic religion of that time, along with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And the Essenes were distinctly polytheistic, and they are obviously at odds with the monotheistic theistic version of the Jewish religion, which also produced the Christian religion. And so the Essenes, if people want to know a reference to who you can identify them with in the Bible, is go to Ezekiel, where Ezekiel is admonishing the people that go in one of the prophecies going forward. He has this vision of these people going into the temple and dressed in white, and they're praying to the east to the sun and praying to Tammuz, which is again one of the parent gods, and whether or not you want to call them Osiris or Tammuz or any one of the other ones, they're all the same god because it's all the same religion. So this is the religion that produced the modern secret societies, from right through to the Templars, through to the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and the Skullbones and all of these different groups. It's
Gary, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Tammuz, now, correct me if I'm wrong here. Was he the offspring of King Nimrod, and obviously the incestuous relationship that we are told in the myths, in the mythology, with his mother? Was Tammuz King Nimrod's offspring?
No. Tammuz is at the top of the pantheon. So he's very much equivalent to Zeus, or Anu, or Marduk. So no. And Nimrod, he's been transposed into a godlike figure, more because he married into the giants. Not that he was a Nephilim. He would be Gibram, as he was described, as what we talked about earlier, but he was not Nephilim, and his genealogy is traced from the Table of Nations. So again, we look at that, and even the Freemasons in their legends, they say he was large and he was a great hunter, but he was not a giant, even though there's lots of giants, a lot of other areas that would say Nimrod was a giant. But to raise him to the top of the pantheon, no, because best case, he would have been a demigod, which I don't believe he was. So you have to understand that there's gods, there's demigods, and there's humans. And that's sort of in terms of how we separate fallen angels, the giants, and human beings. So I would say no to that. Okay. Going back to the Essenes, they trace their religion back to the Great White Brotherhood, which again, you can see some of these connections coming through with some of the secret societies of Heliopolis and the Egyptian religion, and they believe that Moses brought that polytheist religion with him to Israel, and there is the true religion. But the Essenes also, as their most holiest book, believe in the Book of Jubilees by Enoch. And they also believe in the fallen angels and the knowledge that was taught to them. And so they are a direct connection from about 2,000 years ago to prehistory to the modern history. And they're a very important sort of intersection in how all of these things come together. The Essenes would even, they would not give up the names of the fallen angels that they worshipped even upon death, and they swore an oath accordingly. And so when we go back into prehistory, now we need to understand when we're talking about Enoch, there's several books of Enoch. But we need to understand there are two Enochs. One is the descendant of Seth, and the other is the descendant of Cain. Enoch is the first son of Cain, and the first one that learned the knowledge and started the Enochian mysticism that the Essenes and all polytheism is based on, and the religion that crossed the flood and was spread to all the four corners of the earth. And so we have several names in the lineages that are very much identical, whether or not it's Enoch or it's Lamech. And so we have to be very, very careful not to confuse the two. And that's also why I go back to one of the rules that I like to do when I'm doing research from non-biblical sources is if it doesn't match up perfectly with what the Bible says, I become very, very skeptical. I can appreciate the bias with the information, but if it's just totally in opposite positioning of what the Bible says, then it's misinformation and it's a deception. So there are several books of Enoch, like Enoch, Book of John, it's first book of Enoch, second book of Enoch, that I think matches up extraordinarily well with the Bible and Old Testament accounts. And books like the Book of Jude or even quote from the Book of Enoch. But the Book of Jubilees is a whole different ballgame. And I know there will be some people who disagree with me on this, but it is so unaligned with Genesis and with the stories that they're talking. It is totally aligned with what other religions and other mythologies say. I'm very skeptical of the Book of Jubilee, so be very careful just because it's a Book of Enoch that it's a book of what I would call the Holy Enoch or the Saintly Enoch. It could be Enoch the Evil, as I call him in my book, and it is from the books. It is from the knowledge of Enoch that he learns from Cain that he delivers to his descendants that we see the rise of the secret societies and we see the rise of mysticism and we see the rise of the application of the technology to create things like the pyramids as they like to claim. I'm not claiming they built the pyramid. I know there's a lot of speculation on that. What I do and what I do in my book is I let them speak for themselves, but they believe they created the pyramid.
That's interesting. The fact that you talk about the saintly Enoch and an evil Enoch and the fact that there were two of them, I had heard that before, but the way you break it down and you talk about it just blew me away. Now, there were two Lamechs as well, was there not?
Yes, there were two Lamechs, one from each line. And so it's easy to intermix the two lines, and it's easy to intermix the records of both branches. And even the other names in both lines, they're so similar. It is crazy how similar in pronunciation that those names are. And what the polytheist belief is and the ancient Mason belief is and the modern Freemasonry belief is that the monotheists, the Sethites, they contrived their line, that they tried to take away the titles and the royal bloodlines and the legacy and duplicated the names in falsely documenting their history. And I would suggest that it's more clear that the other side has been trying to intermix their history with ours, and they even say that inside the secret societies today. They feared the persecution of the Catholic Church. So as the modern documents came up, they would say, well, no, it's not the evil Enoch that is our patriarch. It's the ecclesiastic or the holy Enoch. It's not the evil Lamech. It's the good Lamech. Trouble is, though, is they also have people like Nama, and they have Jabal and Tubal-Cain. And Tubal-Cain is an artificer of the highest degree in Freemasonry legendary that they relate themselves to. And even some of those legends, they actually say that, hey, they were trying to confuse the lineages so that they wouldn't have the persecution in modern times. So it's very clear that people have to be very, very careful when they're looking at the names and making sure they're applying the stories and the information to the proper lineage. And we see so much in prehistory in Genesis account that there's more going on than what is told to us. And we do have mention of Tubal-Cain, and but we're not really told as to what degree people like Jubal and Nama took their skills to. But the four names that are mentioned in the Bible, Tubal, Nama, Jubal, and Jubal, they are very, very important in polytheist prehistory. And Nama, actually, in the Gnostic religion, is believed to be the original form of Norea. Norea has several different forms in the Greek and Gnostic scriptures that are out there, but to be the same person, Norea and Nama. And Nama is believed in their belief system to have married a giant. And so if we look at what Freemasonry talks about in terms of what these four people did, because this is not all that clear in the Bible. Josephus does give us a little bit more information, but Jabal was actually the one who rejuvenated Masonry in his generation. And that's the fifth science of geometry. And Jubal invented music, which became part of Pythagoras' mysticism after the flood. Nama was accredited with weaving, and in other accounts, she's accredited with teaching people how to read. And, of course, Tubal-Cain was a smith and has a name that's hyphenated back to his father, who was also a smith. And so he's accredited with inventing tools and weapons, and was a master craftsman, and was a military leader, and known in their understanding of history in the Sumerian language as Tubal-Cain. So if we look at all of the things that the sons of Lamech and the one daughter, they started this whole sort of, I guess what has happened is the application of the sciences kind of slowed, but these four reinvigorated it. And for people who aren't familiar with the seven sacred sciences that I'm talking about, maybe I should quickly list them for the people. They sound a little bit simplistic, but it's actually what society is built on. And again, it's the levels that they took these sciences to. So there was grammar for the molding of minds through reading, which we talked about. Rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion. Dialectics, which is the discerning of falsehoods. And all of this combined into what people will really understand today, what was a collective new science that we understand as philosophy, which is all part of the religion. So when people think that philosophy is secular, it is religious-based. It's all part of this whole mysticism. Then there was arithmetic, so all sorts of math. There was geometry, which included alchemy and masonry and building and angles. And there's music, and then there's astronomy. So those are the seven sciences that were taught to the descendants of Cain and taken to whole new levels by the sons of Lamech. And they also had additional knowledge that the seven ruling archons were providing that was absolutely illegal and provided to them in the antediluvian age.
That's interesting stuff. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. I definitely want to get into that. And, folks, this is going to be a two-part show because this, it's funny. When I looked at this whole thing, for years, I've been looking at this and going, what in the world is going on in Genesis 6? And Gary has just laid so many things out, and it's going to take some time for me to digest all of this. So definitely this is going to be a two-part. I do have a caller. It's been on hold for a while. It's an anonymous call, so I'm going to go ahead and take you hot. Anonymous, you are live on the Awakening Liberty Show. How are you doing this evening? Are you there, caller? You may be muted. Oh, I'll come back to him here. So, Gary, again, like I said, my head is swimming when it comes to all of this. It blows me away, absolutely. When we're talking about, you mentioned something about, the fact we got to be careful. And I want to throw this out there, kind of being, my faith is strong in God because I've experienced him so much in my life. My faith is strong in Christ. But there are times when I'm even reading the Bible where I get confused because I actually question everything about the world we live in today. It seems like there's so much manipulation and so much deception. Even when it comes to all the sacred science stuff, it seems like we are not being told the truth. So I start questioning things, especially when it comes to etymology from the Bible. But you mentioned something earlier, how the Bible is, every word has meaning and every word is there for a reason. But there are times, and this bothers me because I start to question the Bible, knowing the Council of Nicaea and how this all came about with the New Testament. For other listeners who, like me, start to question that sometimes because it seems like maybe the Bible had been manipulated, can you give me some a basis for that?
In terms of that the Bible has been manipulated?
Correct.
I'm not convinced that a lot of the wording has been manipulated in the Bible. I know there's some things going on today as some of the publishers of certain types of Bibles are starting to change the wording. But, there are records that go back right through to 700 BC where they can see records as being essentially identical to how they were written then as to how they're written today. There are, as they do translations into other languages, there's a couple of possible meanings that can go with it. So I have a number of Bibles. And different translations of the Bibles, but I tend to lean on the ones that will give the other possible translations, so that if I'm not quite sure what it means, it could mean that. Does it match up then with the rest of the Bible? When I talk about that, it is in there specifically and for a reason. I don't think the Word of God is written in a happenstance sort of way, and I think we need to respect what it says. It will, at times, I think people will say that it might contradict itself. I don't believe the Bible ever contradicts itself. I believe what the Bible does is add additional information as to what may have been given before and continues to build on those precepts, but I don't believe that it is in contradiction. I think unless you can speak perfect ancient languages, then you're going to have to rely on modern translations. Just be careful that there are a few out there today that are starting to change some of the wording. But we're reading the King James Version can be very difficult for a lot of people. So I don't think it's I think people should pick the version that they're most comfortable with. But you should have other copies so that you can compare what's written in that one to another copy. If we talk about things like the Council of Nicaea, they didn't change what was written. They just decided to select what would be in that canon and what would not be. Just as we came around the 14 or 1500s, some of the Apocrypha was also eliminated as well. So, and if you look at the Catholic Bible, you'll notice, being raised Catholic, Sean, that they have several other books that most of the translations that people use today don't have, whether it's the Book of Maccabees or the Book of Ezra or the Book of Wisdom. So there are copies, there are even testaments today that a lot of Protestants aren't all that familiar with. And I know, and I use some quotes out of those books as reference in my book, and I do have readers coming in and say, well, I'm not familiar with this book, it's not in the Bible. Well, it is. It's just there's another Bible that has other books in it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that it's not accurate. It lines up. So, I test what it says and how it lines up, what it says everywhere else, as to whether or not it's legitimate or not. So, I'm not one of those that would get a newer edition of some Bibles. One that I like to rely on, actually it's a 1973 edition, so it's before any of this political correctness that's going on today.
Right. Yeah, that's what confuses me, is the political correctness, but also the infusion of the manipulation and the deception. And we see things like the Pope today doing some strange things and seemingly getting on board with the one world government. So my mind starts turning and I start questioning. It's like, what in the world is going on here? I'm sorry, I digressed.
Well, and if he is the anti-pope of St. Malachi, then he is going to be changing the doctrine and preparing for the false prophet. Yeah.
Again,
that's a different rabbit hole.
We're close. My gut keeps telling me we're close. Going back to the seven sacred scientists, and folks, I have to apologize a little bit. I know Gary. I told Gary I took a spill last Saturday and I dislocated my elbow. So if I've actually quelled a few of my pain issues here. I've actually yelped a few times, but I had my hand on the microphone, so I'm a little out of sorts. I'm in a lot of pain. I dislocated my elbow and fractured my arm chasing a would-be thief off of our porch. So if I'm a little out of sorts, I apologize. Going back to the seven sacred sciences. Now, where did these come from? I mean, was this taught to Adam? Was this just taught to after the fall of man, after Adam was vanquished from the Garden of Eden? Was it taught then, or did Adam know this? Or Where did these 7 sacred sciences come from? Did they come from the dark angels? Was this not something man was intended to know?
According to Freemasonry, it was taught to Adam while he was still in Eden, and so and that Adam was an adept at these sciences and was an active practitioner of them after he left Eden. But their belief is he was taught in Eden. So it either that did happen, which the Bible didn't talk about, or the second part where they'll talk about where this knowledge came from is in the Eden incident of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so for most Christians and monotheists, they'll look at that as well, it's just good and it's evil and they're no longer innocent. But that's not exactly what the serpent says or Lucifer says when he's talking to Eve about eating the fruit. What he's talking about is having her eyes open to the knowledge of good and evil, that they could become like gods, because God was, in their belief system, holding humans back from becoming godlike. And so learning of the knowledge of good and evil is one of the sort of constitutive basis of the knowledge cult of the religion, and I'm going to come back to a specific name on that in a second. So obviously immortality is part of godhood, the ability to have rational judgment and to discipline the knowledge that the gods have is the other aspects that they believe in. So they believe that it wasn't the tree of good and evil, it's the tree of gnosis, the tree of knowledge, in that they received all of this knowledge instantly once they ate of the tree of gnosis. And of course, gnosis is the basis for the Gnostic religion, because it's a knowledge cult, polytheist religion, and that's part of how they're going to climb the ziggurats through their initiation levels to become like God. That is what Lucifer was promising Adam and Eve, that they would be awakened to this knowledge and they would be like gods. So that is probably more likely from a biblical perspective where they would have received this knowledge. But again, we know that, Adam was probably taught a lot of things by God in the Garden of Eden, and as long as he was going to use them in a good way, that was fine. But after the Eden incident, now we have them expelled from Eden, and we have Cain, and we have Abel, and then later we have Seth, and of course Abel is murdered by Cain, and Cain is taught all of this knowledge from Adam, and now he takes it a whole different direction so that they no longer honor the one God of the universe, which is part of the mysticism and part of the problem that caused the flood. And they're going to do everything to honor his new God, Lucifer, who freed them and gave them the knowledge. And they start to pervert it, and they start to do it in ways that God did not want the knowledge used. So, I know we get a bad rap as monotheists and Christians that we're anti-knowledge. I don't believe that's the case. We're just anti-using knowledge and science in ways that are evil, in ways that are contrary to how God wants us to do it. Their opinion is that they want to use it any way they want, and they don't really care what God has to say about it. And the fallen angels use humans and the descendants of Nephilim to manipulate them because they know the power of God, and they'll let people who don't know the full power of God do the things for them.
Amen there. I mean, that's what I see going on in the world today. It seems like a lot of this tech and all this science is being used for a lot of evil purposes. And in fact, one of the things that I observe, Gary, is the people that are running the show, obviously the shadow government, the people behind the scenes. I'm firmly convinced that what we see as our government nowadays is basically a lot of puppets and imposters who are doing the bidding of a Luciferian agenda. And it seems to me that they don't have much they don't have much of a need for mankind. They certainly don't love mankind, and they use this technology, certainly the war technology, to just murder millions of people in the name of profits. And in some cases, it seems that these people are actually doing this just for their own enjoyment and their own pleasure, and that really freaks me out.
It is, and they look at humans like cattle. We are mundane. We have no purpose other than to serve them or do work for them, and if there's too many of us, to get rid of them. The Georgia Stones certainly testifies to a Rosicrucian belief, as the theory goes, who put those Georgia Stones up, that they want to take the population down to a level similar to what happened in prehistory, where in Sumeria and in those legends that the people became too noisy, so we were wiped from the face of the earth with a flood. That's a kind of a cold sort of thought, but I think we need to understand that these organizations, they believe they have the bloodlines let me back up a step. The people who lead these organizations, the puppet masters, so to speak, the ones pulling the strings of the people at the lower levels, they actually believe they are the descendants of Nephilim. And so they believe they are a superior human being, and therefore the average human, who they would call mundane is one of their favorite words, they're like cattle. And they're prepared to slaughter us en masse. We are, if we can be useful to them, fine. If not, they'll certainly keep our numbers in check. And I think we're going to see a holocaust of unbelievable proportions when we get into the end time. And, of course, that's also what Revelation predicts as two major holocausts, one by Babylon and one by the Antichrist. But that's part of their belief system. And through the book, I will talk about these bloodlines, not only from the royal bloodlines, but the noble bloodlines, and who actually organizes these secret societies. And once you understand that they believe that they have the bloodlines and something that they would call the gene of ISIS, which they believe is the DNA difference that came from Nephilim, the spark of the divine. They believe that the spark has been disseminated all over the earth, and if they can bring about world government, they can unite the spark of the divine. And when that happens, this harmonic convergence, as you'll hear from the New Age religion, which again is just an extension of theosophy, which is Gnosticism, which goes back to all of these other ancient religions, which are the same religion. They're talking about the spark of the divine. That's the 1,000 points of light allegory that globalists like to use, and they use it, and of course George Bush Sr. used in one of his speeches. They use these terms all of the time, but they're talking about that. They believe they have a different breeding than the average human. Now, there's different levels of bloodlines in terms of purity, but all of them, if they become illuminated and higher to go into the Rosicrucians and even higher than that, you have to have more pure bloodlines.
Thus, that's why many of these elites seem to intermarry. And obviously, just strange. You look at a lot of these elites, and they look a lot alike. Let me ask you this, Gary, because I've done some research into this, and I've posed the question. I think other people have too. Many people have about the Rh negative factor blood types. Is that where this DNA manipulation might lead to?
Well, obviously there's a lot of speculation on the Rh negative bloodlines, and there's a lot of speculation that a lot of the royal families are heavily dominated with the Rh negative bloodline, and that's the bloodline of the Nephilim, and that the Rh negative somehow was interjected in the human race that is foreign to our bloodline. I don't know whether that's true. Certainly the people who have those royal bloodlines aren't exactly lining up to let us test their bloodlines to see whether that's actually the case. But it does make sense.
from a speculative perspective, that they would have something different either in their genes or in their blood that would trace them back to the Nephilim to back up their belief system. Because here's what people don't understand. These families, whether they're royals or closely related to the royals, or the ones in the background that people may not know who the names are, they trace their genealogies back. They trace them all the way back through history. They trace them all the way back through prehistory. And they trace them, and they have these genealogies taking them back to the Nephilim. So whether or not that's a lie, or that, and it's just a belief, or it's fact, that's what they believe, and that's what's important.
Yeah, I've often said that to Christians. It's like, when they talk about, there isn't some big octopus out there. Well, folks, there is a big octopus out there, and quite frankly, they are nefarious, they are evil, and it doesn't really matter what you believe. The fact that they believe that they are Nephilim, that they are, they believe in Lucifer, and they're trying to usher in an end time. I mean, I think that's really important that we understand that they believe it, and that's probably the most important thing for us to realize.
Exactly. It's not whether or not we want to discount that that's actually true. That's actually irrelevant. It's what they believe and what they're trying to bring about. And if we look at royal dynasties and noble families, they all intermarry to keep their bloodlines pure. Now, they have to bring in outside bloodlines at times to prevent too many genetic diseases and things, but they have, throughout history, tried to keep the bloodlines as pure and as intact as possible. And it continues today. There's an article that I read that not that long ago, that all of the U.S. presidents can trace their genealogy back to the Plantagenet dynasty. And people don't know who the Plantagenet dynasty is. That's like the dynasty of King Richard after they inherited the name out of France through the intermarriages there. And the Plantagenet, through intermarriage, actually got the English monarchy, but that's not unusual in how these families move around. But understand they're all connected. And if these pseudo blue bloods in the United States, who are less pure bloodlines, are trying to connect themselves back to the Plantagenet, and in the book I'll connect the Plantagenet back and forth all the way through so people can see how those bloodlines go forward, there's something to it. And it continues to this day that they intermarry. I'm from Canada. People aren't aware of that, and we just elected a new prime minister, Justin Trudeau. Well, he had a father named Pierre Trudeau who was a member of the Club of Rome. And what's interesting about Pierre Trudeau is that, and the Club of Rome is that they divided the world up in the late 60s and the early 70s, that they were going to create world government and create 10 distinct regions or trading blocks or spheres of influence or economic zones, whatever you want to call it, but divide them into 10, just like Atlantis was, so that they can bring about the new Atlantis. And so now, when Pierre was elected prime minister in 1968, he was unmarried. So he married somebody, and who was that? Well, it was a Sinclair. And if people don't know who the Sinclairs are, they're the ones who started Freemasonry after Templarism fell and protected them, along with King Bruce, from the Catholic Inquisition to totally wipe them from the face of the earth. So all of this is connected, and it demonstrates that they're still intermarrying for the bloodlines today. So they believe it.
Yeah, most definitely. The deeper I go down with this subject, or any subject that I start exploring, it seems like there are more dots that pop up dots pop up that I didn't even know were there that need connecting. So it's crazy. I have another caller here. I'm going to see if I can take this call. It's area code 780. Once again, it's area code 780. You are live on the Awakening Comedy Show. How are you doing this evening?
Great, Sean. Thank you. Hi, it's Alan calling in. Hi, Gary. How are you?
Good. And yourself?
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate how you started going in and talking about the different art of rhetoric, and I find that really interesting. and about the Shining Ones, because the Shining Ones are always mentioned in Freemasonry, and like you mentioned, how it levels right up to Rosicrucianism.
Mm-hmm.
And the other interesting thing it gets into, you just were getting off the topic about the spark of divine or divine spark. Mm-hmm. Billy Graham talked about that as well, the fifth dimension man, back in the 50s there.
Yep.
And as we see now, everybody's starting to get into this. We've got to progress now. We can evolve into the higher consciousness. The kingdom, so to speak, is at hand.
And they have to have world government to make that happen in their belief system. Everybody's got to be united under one government and one religion to make this happen.
And that kind of all about.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things I find bizarre about New Age is so many people talk about raising their frequency. And in science, I've studied some of the Tesla, and obviously there are some indication that the elite are trying to raise the frequency of the planet. But for myself, this whole raising the frequency thing seems to be a place I don't want to go. When I raise my frequency, I tend to get angry. I get angst. I get severe anxiety, severe stress. I am constantly trying to lower my frequency, so I am not vibrating at a position where I'm about ready to fly off the handle. And I see that in the New Age movement, and it just trips me out.
Yeah.
That's where we're getting science and scientism. And if we look at chakras, like I was trying to study some of these speakers, ufology, and all of a sudden they get into consciousness, raising their frequency, do your chakras. And I don't know if I'm correct or not, but the chakras is the alignment of planets. Do you know anything about that, Wayne?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's the whole. You have to understand that there's only two religions out there. There's only possibly three belief systems. There's one that's monotheistic, and the other one is polytheistic. And the polytheistic, whether or not it's Eastern religion or it's New Age, that is one religion. It doesn't matter whether it was the ancient Aztec religion or the Toltec religion. It doesn't matter which religion it's the same religion. And so all of this is talked about in all of those different religions. They have different terms and different names, but all of it has to do with the planets. And it also brings in the things like the zodiac as well. The planets in their belief system were named after the fallen angels and gods, and that they have an impact on our destiny. And that's where the fate comes from. And fate is part of the fairy allegory that we talked about earlier. So all of this goes back to the ancient belief system. I was also interested to note when you're talking about Freemasonry that about light and knowledge. And light is a key allegory in Freemasonry and in Gnosticism and all of the knowledge cults.
Huge.
And the Freemasonry people believe they are the children of light, and that they are the disciples of light. And so they believe that they have the true knowledge and that we are the evil ones. So they do a complete role reversal of who monotheists are, who we believe we are, to what they think they are. They think we're the evil ones. They think we are the oppressors, just as we think that of them. So it's really quite interesting when you get into these different allegories of each of the two religions. But I have to underline that, you know, if you look at the religions and follow their history, they all go back to the same religion.
They do. And your book really expands on so many areas, and that's really interesting how you talked about Pierre Elliott Trudeau, going back to the Sinclair family, which you bring out in your book.
Yeah.
Prior to Sion and so forth, and King Arthur. It just covers so much. Anyways, thank you very much for letting me have a chat there.
No problem.
Alan,
sounds like you've read the book.
Thank you for calling into the show, Alan.
Thank you, Sean.
Gary,
Thank you.
We're running out of time here, but part 2 of this, I really want to dig into this control structure and who these people are, who they think they are, what they believe. And in fact, I was hoping to get to it tonight, but I think we'll start off next week. I want to give everybody a heads up about some of your research. And I heard a story about you meeting somebody on an airplane who happened to be an adept of Freemasonry adept. And I thought that was a fascinating story. Can you give everybody just a quick snippet as to where that's going to go? And we'll start part 2 off with that.
Well, if it's the same story that I'm thinking of, is that I just recently retired at the end of the year, so I was working all the time. I was doing this research, and I used to fly to a lot of locations. I used to do a lot of work and a lot of reading on planes and try and get things done. And I was sitting beside an elderly gentleman. He must have been in 70-ish, maybe older, and he noticed one of the books I was reading, and he started asking me a few questions about that. And as it turns out, he was a 33-degree illuminated Freemason of the Scottish Rite. And so then I started asking him some questions, and what he said was, well, if you can figure out what this symbol means on my ring that I'm wearing, I'll answer anything that you want to ask. And so he has this ring, and it's got this blue background on it. And in the center of the ring, there's a small line. And then on both sides, there's 2 dots. And so I'm going, I'm not real sure about that. Can I have some time to think about it? And he said, yeah. He says, take all the time in the world that you want. And he kind of laughs. And, he continues doing his own reading. And so I come back and I said, I'm not real sure what it is, but maybe I'll take a stab in the dark. I said, that line, not sure what that is. It could be a stick or it could be a cane. And I said, those 2 dots, there's 2 of them, could be balls. I said, the only way I could put that together would be 2, as in the 2 dots. The dots as being balls and the stick as being cane. I said, that's only I can think it would be 2-ball cane. He says, well, that's absolutely correct. I'm surprised you were able to connect that sort of allegory. So he says, so go ask the questions that you want. So I got a couple of quick questions, and he basically said, you're asking questions I am just not permitted to answer, and I will not answer. So he kind of shut me down. But I think it's an interesting story just because he was there, and, he showed me the ring. He claimed to be a 33-degree adept. And he took a lot of interest in what I was reading, and he said, there's a lot more to learn. Keep learning it. So he said, I can't ask. You want to ask me simple little questions, you can ask me that, but the types of questions you're asking, I'm just not permitted to answer.
Bound by secrecy and the threat of death if they expose some of what they know. Gary, we're out of time for this show. I want to invite everybody to come back next Saturday at 6 p.m. Pacific for part 2 with Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. We're going to explore more of this, and I'm actually going to spend some more time reading the book this week. So, Gary, I want to thank you for being on the show. Quick, tell them the website.
Yes, anybody wants to go to my website, it's www.genesis6conspiracy.com. That's www.genesis6conspiracy.com. On there, I've got a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters. I have many of the interviews that I've done also up there if somebody wants to listen to a few other interviews to see what was discussed. There's also an ability to connect to Amazon, whether it's .ca or Amazon.com to buy the book, or BarnesandNoble.com. Or if you want an autographed copy, there's a buy from the author, and I will send you out an autographed copy. So there's more information about the subject and the book on the website. And if you want a copy or from Amazon or from myself, that's readily available off the website as well. And it's available from most online bookstores through Christian bookstores in the U.S. as it's distributed by STL, Send the Light Distribution. And if people want to get a hold of me on Facebook, I'm on there all the time. So shoot me a note, send me a friend request. I'll answer, and we can answer any of your questions.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to next week. I'm going to spend some time reading this week, and I'm going to hammer you next week. Okay, Gary?
I'm going to have my game face on by the sounds of it.
Gary, thank you so much for being on the show. Everybody, the Awakening Liberty Show next Saturday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Tune in for part 2 of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy with Gary Wayne. Until then, may God keep you and bless you. Good night now.
At American Family Insurance, we help protect what you've achieved so you can fearlessly go after your dreams. Find out how we're helping others pursue their dreams and declare your own at amfam.com/dreams. American Family Insurance. Insure carefully, dream fearlessly.
American Family Insurance Company, American Family Mutual Insurance Company, 6000 American Parkway, Madison, Wisconsin, 53783.